we can go ahead and kick things off. So I'm Caleb Meek. I'm the organizer of the Land Puppet Users Group. So we're close partners with Puppet, do a whole lot of work with them. They're a big part in our DevOps work. So, happy to have Chris here to kick things off. So just a couple of housekeeping things. Like I was saying earlier, the bathroom, if you'll go right out the door, make a left, go all the way down that hall, bathrooms will be on your right. And then, of course, help yourself to the beer, the food. So we're happy to have Chris here, senior consultant with Puppet. So, Chris, you want to go ahead and kick things off?
So, welcome. Good to see you all again. And I am a little grateful that it's not as big of a crowd as last time, which was kind of imposing. I want to talk about Hiera, and this is kind of going to be a dual-purpose talk. It's difficult to gauge what kind of audience I'm going to get when I'm here because, being on the road all the time, I can never make it. So there's a little bit of a thread of like what is Hiera, an introduction to Hiera running through here, and there's also room for some discussion of more advanced design patterns and concerns that you might run into while you're applying it in the real world. So I'm interested, who here is using Hiera to manage systems in the real world? And who has at least played with it a little bit? Okay, and who has never heard of Hiera or seen it before? Anyone? Okay. There should be something for everyone here. And that's kind of about the mix that I expected, so there'll be something for everyone. What I want to talk about is, first, what is Hiera? So we'll start by getting a foundation and what it's for, what kind of problems I want to solve with it, and how I approach those problems, and we'll talk about how Hiera works as well. And we'll briefly touch on how you might configure it. You got to get it installed, set up, and how do you get your code in place, so we'll talk about that. Then I want to talk about how to lay out your Hiera hierarchy and your data, and some of the things that you can expect to run into there. I want to talk about how you get your data back out, so I'll talk about a couple of data lookup strategies and ways to apply those, and then we'll have some room for Q&A at the end. But if there's anything that I can clarify in the middle, don't hesitate to raise your hand. There's no need to wait till the end if you think it's particularly relevant to what we're talking about. First, what is Hiera? Hiera is a data lookup tool that is going to return to me the value of a given key. Specifically, it's going to search through a collection of data stores that I have on my Puppet master, and it's going to do that based on the values of factor facts and other Puppet variables that are presented to it in the catalog request for a given node. So a node connects to the master, it asks for a catalog, it gives all its factor facts to that master, and the master is going to, at some point during catalog compilation, depending on how we set it up, it's going to ask Hiera for the values of some keys. So the values that we get back are going to depend on what the collection of factor facts and Puppet variables is like on that node. Means we can make some decisions about what class parameters it gets, what data we pass to various classes and functions, and so on. First is that despite the name, Hiera is not organized in a hierarchical fashion. If we were to lay out a hierarchy, something that would really, we could be pedantic and call it a hierarchy, that would mean that a node at one level contains the nodes that are attached to it at another level. And that's not how Hiera works. You could, in theory, lay out Hiera data that is coincidentally hierarchical. But a better way of describing the way that Hiera works is that it uses an ordered lookup. We have a collection of criteria ranging from more specific here at the top to the least specific here at the bottom. And we're going to search them in order for relevant data. And the first thing that Hiera is going to do is it's going to look at each of these levels, and it's going to identify which slot is relevant for the context of the node that is requesting the data. So for example, you can imagine that I've got a machine that's called node 4. That's in my non-production server tier. It lives in my Portland data center, and this bottom here, this level is called common. Those are values that I'm going to use if I don't find anything else. What's the significance of the order here? Not really anything, because I made it up for the talk. It doesn't represent real machines. This is kind of a simplified reflection of things that I've seen in customer deployments in the real world. But I've got some concerns here that might be in different orders. I'm pretty sure that my common stuff is going to be at the bottom. I want to look at that last. And I know that node-specific values are going to be at the top. But what goes in the middle, this is where things are going to depend on how I organize my systems and how my workflow looks. In this case, I'm imagining that server tier specific values are of a higher importance to me, so I'm going to use those to override things relevant to the data center. It might be different for you, and you can configure this order and you can configure the criteria that it uses. But having identified the slots at each level that match the values for the node, so I've got a certificate name of node 4, and I've got a custom factor fact here for the server tier. It's got a value of non-production. I've got another custom factor fact down here that describes what data center I'm in. It's got a value of Portland. These are the 4 that are going to match: node 4, non-production, Portland, and common. And when I ask Hiera to give me the value of some key, it's going to search a strategy like this. It starts at the top, and on that layer, it picks the most relevant slot, which is node 4. It goes to the next one. If it doesn't find its value, it's going to make its way all the way to the bottom. Whether or not it keeps going is going to depend on how we're asking Hiera to give us the data, and we'll talk about how that works in the data lookup section later on. But this is the general strategy we're going to use. One important thing here to point out is, again, there's nothing about Portland that contains either production or non-production. There's nothing about non-production that contains node 3. If I change the values of these factor facts, a different slot is going to win at that level. I don't need to rearrange anything else except for to change the value of that fact. What we end up with is that Hiera is kind of like a large nested case statement. If I really put my mind to it, I could sit down and I could write a Puppet manifest that has case statements, 7 or 8 levels deep, and switch on all the relevant factor facts and variables, and I could accomplish the same thing that I'm doing here. Personally, I think it's a little bit better to lay things out in Hiera. We follow a convention, and we've got a configuration file, but there's nothing here that I couldn't do with a Puppet manifest. That's kind of going to be our running theme through all the stuff that we look at, is that I could do it with Hiera or I could do it with a Puppet manifest, but I'm a big fan of Hiera, and these are all things that I tend to solve using Hiera rather than with code. So, if I want to get this going, what things do I need in place? And here I'm also going to talk about ways that you might want to or not configure Hiera on your system. First thing, obviously, is you need Puppet and Hiera installed. You're not going to be able to compile catalogs and get class parameter values from Hiera unless you've got the software in place. If you're using Puppet Enterprise, this ships out of the box. It's configured. It's ready to go. Most of the distributions of Puppet that you see these days are either set up to use it or will include it. If you get our open source Puppet distribution, it comes with Hiera there, and usually in something like Debian or Red Hat, it might be an external package. Question?
Yeah. So Hiera is a predominantly Puppet master side of a tool or a utility. It's not, you can't do Puppet apply with Hiera?
Hiera is a tool to be used during catalog compilation, which typically means that it's going to be something that you run on your Puppet master. But if you're using Puppet Apply, then the node that you're managing with Puppet Apply is compiling its own catalog, so in that sense it's acting as its own master. And I could do Hiera lookups there. But it is correct to say that I'm going to use Hiera while I'm compiling the catalog as opposed to while I'm enforcing it. By the time I'm enforcing it, it's too late, because the goal with Hiera is to look up values that I'm going to use to figure out what goes into the catalog. And once that catalog is delivered to the node, there's no more changing it. It's just, it's a static JSON document. So yeah, typically this will be your Puppet master. If you're using Puppet Apply, then you have to ship the Hiera data around to every node as well. Maybe what you want, maybe not. But wherever you're compiling catalog, you're going to have this configured. You need to have Hiera.yaml set up, and this is going to tell Hiera where to find its data and how to look through it. There's no real default behavior here. You're going to have to write a Hiera config file that reflects the way that your infrastructure is put together. And lastly, we're going to have to fill in some data, and we'll talk more about that in the lookup section, but we'll also talk about kind of the plumbing of getting the data onto the server in this section. I've got to write a Hiera config file, and this is a pretty basic example, and also a pretty common example of what a Hiera config file might look like. I've got 3 things that I've got to define. First is I've got to define a list of backends. This file is written in YAML, so using YAML syntax, that's an array. It's an array with 1 element. The default is that I've got only the YAML backend configured. There are a lot of other backends out there. There's a MongoDB backend, there's a MySQL backend, there's a JSON backend that's a little bit faster than the YAML backend, but not by much. And file? I don't think there's a backend that's called file. there's eYAML, which tends to be what most people end up using, which is YAML with encryption. But yeah, I don't recall a backend that was.
There's one that you could stick a file. Basically, it would pull files for YAML or pull files from Hier. Maybe I'm thinking something else.
I mean, the default YAML it's going to use files, so that's.
No, it's actually you could pull. You change your. You could use the same directory structure, but you would have a .d after it, and then it would pull the file name. This isn't for Hier.
I mean, it's always going to use the file name. I'm not sure what you mean, but.
No, it would pull the entire file out as a data point, so you could have the configuration.
Oh, yeah, I haven't run into that.
It was a long time ago, so I haven't used it since.
That could have some useful applications in the real world that I can think of. I don't know. I don't know about that though. Anyway, for each backend, I've got to tell it how to find its data. In this case, I've got one backend configured, the YAML backend, and I have the data dir directive set here. This just says, here's where you're going to look for Hier data, and inside this directory is we're going to organize things according to this hierarchy here. So hierarchy is where I list what the lookup layers are. I've got 4 here. It's going to search from top to bottom, so the most specific one I've got here is nodes. It's the same as we saw in the diagram before. I have a layer that's just for nodes. After that, I have my server tiers. After that, I have data centers, and then I have common at the bottom. What this means is that I'm going to have a directory inside the Hier data directory that's called nodes. I'll have a directory called tiers and so on, and the files inside there are going to be named according to possible values of these variables. So this syntax where I've got client, server tier, and data center, I'm interpolating the variable there, and I'm going to name files after the possible values.
So nodes, tiers, data centers, and common are all peer folders at the etc Puppet Labs code Hier data.
Yeah, they're all together in the same directory there.
And the % data center is the variable that's coming from?
It's a factor fact or it's some other variable. There's nothing that we can tell from looking at this file about where it came from.
Just that it's available at compilation time.
Client cert is certainly going to be the certificate name because I can't override that. And common is hard-coded, so we know it's going to be called common.yaml. Server tier and data center, I'm imagining, are custom factor facts, but you could have set them in some other way. All that I really know is that these are variables that are in scope at the time the Hier lookup happens.
One other question. You're saying YAML is one backend.
Yeah.
Let's assume that it's HSQL DB backend.
Yeah.
Okay. So I could say :YAML, what is the data directory, and then say :HSQL DB, that could be in an HSQL database.
Yeah, so if I've got multiple backends, I'm going to have to write a section like this for each one. And the kind of information that I have to give for a backend is going to depend on how it works. You know, for YAML or JSON, I'm going to tell it a directory on disk. For eYAML, I'm going to tell it a directory on disk, and I'm going to tell it how to find its crypto keys. For a database, I'm going to give it connection parameters that you can use to connect to the database.
Hierarchy shared for things that understand what that means.
Hierarchy is shared globally for the entire Puppet Master installation. This is, I believe it's Hiera ticket number 46. There's a request to make Hiera.yaml a per environment thing. For now, that isn't possible. So
I thought there have been progress.
There are various claims that you can use data in modules to solve some of the same problems, but it doesn't solve some of the others. So the latest situation is always going to be described in that ticket. I don't know off the top of my head whether it's been closed.
But you can overcome that by just adding another entry to hierarchy that's keyed on the environment, right?
You're going to have to add something to key on environments. And typically, the way that people work around this is I've got to decide on one hierarchy for the entire installation.
There you go.
But what I can do is I can promote things through environments by just deploying Hier data in environments that reflect the way I'm promoting code. So typically, this is a really common thing, and this I think is the way it ships out of the box now. But this is, at least over the past year, this is far and away the most common value that I see for data dir, is that it's going to be in Etsy Puppet Labs code environments or wherever your Puppet environments are, / environment name, because I've got a variable called environment I can use to interpolate that, and then I've got Hier data installed in there. So if I wanted to promote things from one environment to the next, I can do that. I can do that with the data. The thing is that how do I test reversing the order of two hierarchy levels. Well, there's a way to do that using data in modules, but it means that I have to move that logic into data in module system instead of here. So, do I think that HI 46 is a done deal? I don't know. I haven't worked enough with data in modules to determine whether or not I can solve this problem like I want to, but I'm not going to say that it's impossible. So, if you have multiple backends, they're going to be searched a whole backend at a time. So it's going to go through the entire hierarchy in one backend, then it's going to go through the entire hierarchy in the next one. I have never seen anyone who is happy having more than 3 backends. People tend to be able to tolerate 2, but as soon as you've got 3, suddenly it becomes a real pain. Especially if you've got each one of these in a separate repository. And now I've got 3 or 4 repos to juggle. I've got my control repository and whatever module I'm working on, and I've got 1 or 2 higher data repositories that I've got to tag all of those and deploy all of them. So one thing that can cut this down is if you're using both YAML and eYAML, just throw all your regular YAML data into the eYAML backend. It's not going to slow you down much, and that way you're going to not have to search an entire backend every time anyway. But if you have tons of backends, it is going to be a pain to debug. And one thing you can imagine is I've got this order defined in my hierarchy. So list this out 3 or 4 times in a row, and you're going to find that things that you assume are at the top end up being at the bottom depending on which backend they're in. As long as everyone on your team knows how it's working, then you might be able to get away with it, but more complexity is just going to be more pain. Anyway, if I'm deploying higher data on a per environment basis, then often the easiest way to get that on my server is going to be to put it in my R10K control repository. If you're not using R10K, I would suggest that you look into it. If you're using Puppet Enterprise, we have a new component in there we call Code Manager, which includes R10K along with a little bit of other stuff. They're both going to let you do the same thing, which is to write a Puppet file to install your modules, and also to distribute stuff statically with the state of your environment. So if you told me that I had to set up a new Puppet infrastructure and I didn't know anything about what your infrastructure looked like or what your workflow looked like in the company, I'd probably come up with something like this. I'd probably come up with a control repository where I've got a branch for each one of my environments, and these are the things I'm going to put in there. I'm going to have, in my dist directory, I'm going to have a module for custom facts. I'm going to have modules for my roles and profile classes for node classification. I'll have the environment config, I'll have the site manifest and the Puppet file, of course, but importantly, I'm also going to have all of my higher data inside that control repository. This means that whenever I deploy the modules and the roles and profiles and the custom facts for a Puppet environment, the higher data is going to come with it. There's some reasons you might or might not want to do this, and there's some debate on my team over what the standard recommendation should be. Personally, the way that I see it is that the easiest way to get started, if you have like one team who's doing the initial Puppet development and you know that everyone's going to be kind of working together at least for a while, for a few months, the easy thing to do and kind of the most straightforward thing to do is to put it into the control repository. There are some reasons, though, that you might know up front that you don't want to do that. One is that if you want to have different teams maintaining the data and the Puppet code, then probably the easiest way to express that restriction is just to make them in separate repositories. It doesn't mean that you're no longer able to install on a per environment basis or even to do it with R10K, because I can just use another R10K remote and I can install the higher data repository according to those branches in there. Another thing that might influence this is if you have Puppet environments whose boundaries don't reflect the same way that your higher data looks at environments, then it might not be a useful distinction for you to install like a different environment's worth of code in each different Puppet environment. If that's the case, if the way that your data, your decision-making tree works, if that doesn't reflect the way that your Puppet environments are laid out, then you probably don't want to install what's going to end up being your production higher data and then a bunch of uselessness. I've seen people end up in that situation. It's kind of up to you. You could still make decisions based on environment, though. Even if you were doing this, you just want to add that to the hierarchy. So you'd have like another level in there that looks at environment, and you can pick a slot there. That, I'm sure, has not really given anyone a clear idea of whether to put it in the control repo or not. I would say start by putting it in there, and if you don't like it, if you run into one of these situations or you find something else, it's easy enough to cut out and put it in its own repo. Just move the files, run git init, and you're on your way. but don't forget to set up RTK. So once we've got Hiera set up and we've got some data built up and laid down on the server, we're going to start expanding what we're doing with Hiera pretty quickly. So I want to talk about how to lay out data and how to think about the way that it's going to be used in Puppet. And so in this section, we'll talk about some things that come up while you're designing your hierarchy. The next section, we're going to talk about how to get it back out with Lookup. So these kind of things, these things kind of run together. This diagram here reflects what the normal behavior of Hiera is, and when you're laying out data, when you're trying to think about which hierarchy level goes above another one, which slots are going to be storing your data, this is kind of the model I would assume is going to be the case. There's another way that we can look stuff up that we'll talk about later, but the normal behavior is this. We start at the top, and we're going to search our way down. So my entire possible search path looks like this. I've got this blue line that goes down to the bottom, but I'm imagining here that I found the value I was looking for in non-production. The way that it works is that as soon as it finds a value, it's going to return that and then stop looking. So if it found it up here on node 4, that's what would win, and it would never see anything below. In this case, though, I found it in non-production, so that's the value that got returned, and I never searched on to Portland or to Common. This means that as you are laying data out, you should be thinking about what you're covering up from below. If I had a generic value for non-production here that covered up the distinction between data centers, either this is probably a bad place to put it, or these two are in the wrong order. And this means that sometimes you're going to have things where perhaps this level needs to cover up this one, or where this one needs to cover up this one. In that case, there's not really going to be any solution except for that I have to repeat it somewhere. So you can imagine that if I can't have a generic value for non-production, then I'm going to have to repeat it in Portland and London for all the machines that are non-production, which might mean that I end up putting it on a per node basis.
Would you do a split?
A split.
Since you have directory, your hierarchy, you could put production, data center, and then below that one put data center production, and then.
Oh yeah, I mean I can chain things together. I'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, that's another way I might be able to get to it. But I'm gonna have to repeat something at some point. If I split it like that by chaining together multiple facts, I'm gonna end up putting the same data in two places, which is okay. Better than having 141 levels in the hierarchy, which people have done that.
Can you go back to the picture, please?
Yeah.
So if I'm laying out data, so I have, let's take the production case. There's node 4 in non-production, but there's also, let's say there's also a node 4 in production.
I can't tell whether node 4 is in production or non-production, but if I have two nodes with the same cert name, I can't tell which one I'm looking at, and this is what's going to win.
So in the split, the production, non-production split,
yeah.
Is that a separate data store?
Yeah, this is a totally separate concern. So let's say that I've got node 4, non-production, Portland, and Common, and I log in here and change the custom factor fact to point to production. I can do that. It's fine. I would go like this instead. There's nothing about non-production that contains any of these. I can't tell by looking at them. So the fact that they're lined up here on the screen is kind of a coincidence. There's nothing about non-production that contains 4, 5, and 6. Non-production might be 2 and 4 and 6, even numbers for non-production and odd for production. I can't tell by looking at the data which one contains the other.
Production and non-production side by side.
Yeah.
Should be 2 folders for production and non-production?
2 files at least. I might have them in a directory, but the most common thing to do here is that there's some directory called tiers, and it's got files in it called production.yaml and non-production.yaml. I might have others too. I might have like test or dev, but whatever possible values I have for that fact, I'm going to have a file for each one in that directory there.
If there is an occasion where I may need to do an AND statement, not just a single value, this AND, that it stops at first time, then how's it going to get to second?
There's a way that I can do that, which we'll talk about toward the end. You can get them back in an array or a hash. Yeah. Probably have time to grab the other one before then. Anyway, something to think about is this, I can override stuff that's at a lower level from a higher level. I often see people hesitate to put something into common.yaml because they say, well, this value is not right for every server. That doesn't matter. What I want to put in common.yaml primarily are if I have something that I know is safe to fall back to, I'll put that there. So if I know that the state that I want for the telnet service is disabled, I'll put that in common.yaml, and that way, if something fails, it will fail into a safer state. More importantly, though, I kind of want to put what I think are the best for the most at lower levels, because I know that I can override with something more specific later. So if I know that there are some individual nodes that don't need a value, I'm not really going to worry about that when I'm putting things into my server tier level or my data center level, because if I have one or two oddball servers, I can override things there. So how do I figure out what my hierarchy should look like? The only way you're going to be able to do this is if you know what priorities there are in your infrastructure, what defines what makes your nodes different. There's not going to be a way to kind of just do this inductively from looking at your infrastructure. You're going to have to understand how it's put together. Once you know what puts it together, though, then you can write out those priorities, figure out if there are groups that go together, like a concern that's always kind of the same. Maybe that's one level of the hierarchy. You want to try to keep it short. 6 to 8 tends to be about as complex as anyone likes having a hierarchy. So no more than 2 or 3 backends and no more than 6 or 8 levels of hierarchy. If you have to go to 9, though, that's fine. Just don't go to 141. That's too many. They were not happy about that. Don't keep it so short, though, that you have to repeat everything. You can imagine if I just had common.yaml and I had a nodes directory, then I could still describe everything that I need to for my infrastructure. I would just be repeating the same value over and over again in every node. If I just had a nodes hierarchy, that would work too. It'd be like I have to install a different version of the same properties file on every server. Rather than do that, though, I want to repeat myself less. What I don't want to have to do is to describe every single thing that matters anywhere about anything in my hierarchy. So one thing I can do to kind of compress these together is by chaining together multiple facts into the file name for a single hierarchy level. So for example, I could do something like this. Let's say I added a directory for platforms, and I wanted to add 3 different things there. I want to know what kind of kernel it is, and what operating system it is, and what operating system major release is. This would be 3 different levels. If I wanted to tell Linux from Windows, I could do that with just a kernel level. And if I want to tell Red Hat from Debian, I can do that with an operating system level. And I want to tell CentOS 7 from CentOS 6, I can do that with another one. The disadvantage here is that if I have something that is generic to Linux, I'm going to have to repeat it 3 times, one for each of these. Is that worse than having to maintain extra levels of the hierarchy, though, especially when one of these might override another one? The only way to know for sure, again, is to understand what priorities go into your infrastructure and how it's put together. I don't have a generic answer here, but this is a very useful tool to keep in mind. Yes?
Could you stick a common file that would contain defaults?
Oh, can I have a common file that lacks certain values so that it fails?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, by the way. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about lookups, but...
Yeah, because I've used commons in the hierarchy directories on a regular basis as a default.
So I put a comment in here. How is it going to fall back to that unless I have...
You put the...
I mean, I could chain together 3 and then 2 and then 1 and then have a comment, yeah.
Well, no, the thing is you put in the directory, you put the directory name, you put the listing, and
oh, yeah.
you have the directory name again, and then you put comment.
Yeah, so I could, one other thing I could do is instead of using dashes here, I could divide these up into subdirectories and then have a comment at the end. That's one way to get there. These are just file names, kind of is the point. So if you can think of a way to organize the files on disk, look for the factor fact values there, and then you can pull things together in that way.
Do you think that if you're not entirely sure how to go about this, it might make sense to kind of start building it, start with common?
Yeah.
And then when you repeat yourself once, add a layer, and then kind of just refactor over and over and optimize?
That tends to be a good approach, is to start more generic and then go more specific. But you got to do it in a way where you're thinking about it, otherwise you're going to end up with, oh, I had to make a decision, so there's a new hierarchy level. There's always going to be some change in the hierarchy going on. It's a little difficult because I can't do it on a per environment basis, but to assume that I'm going to get it right the first shot is just never going to happen.
Can you do
almost like database normalization?
There's definitely some things that are related to database normalization in Hiera. I would not want to have it in the, what is the most normalized? I forget now. Anyway, don't go crazy. Plan on repeating yourself a little bit. Question?
Yeah. So can you do parameter substitution? Or what I mean by that is, like, let's say common says data 1. It's a parameter. But data really, let's say in this case, in a node case, right? Let's say one of my values says node4.xyz.com.
Yeah.
So I really want to put percent whatever the parameter .xyz.com, but that value comes from the more specific, like node 4.
Okay, so the question is, let's say that I want to interpolate some other variable into the response that I give.
Yes.
Yes and no. You can make references to other nodes in a YAML file. It doesn't work across files. And I've seen some situations where it didn't work like we expected it to, and was never able to really run down why. The second option is that there is, and I hesitate to bring this up, but there's an extension to Hiera where you can have Hiera use Puppet to make another Hiera lookup and then return to you the value of the thing that you sent in.
So I have to take on the responsibility of parsing the file.
Well, you have to know what you're looking up. You have to assume you're doing a second Hiera lookup. It's going to slow things down because then asking for that key causes 2 lookups, and it's going to make everything really complex. I'll put it this way, if I started somewhere in a new job and I looked in common.yaml and there was more than 2 of those, I would probably start looking at more job listings. I would not want to work in a shop where it's a normal design pattern to use the Hiera lookup function from within a Hiera data file. However, if it's once or twice in the entire thing and it's well documented, then it's okay. That's why it's there. It's one of those things where it's worse than an exec, but.
So what you're saying in this example?
About creating resources.
What you're saying in this example is, under node 4 you should have node4.xyz.com, and for node 3 you should have node3.xyz.com.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, okay, I'm going to have a xyz.com, but use this value here.
So if I knew that the variable that I was putting together could be composed from 2 other variables, then there's 2 ways that I can think about it. One is that if that is generally true, I want to do that in the Puppet manifest. I can get 2 values from 2 Hiera lookups, stick them together, and then use that in the context of the manifest. If that's true in some places but not others, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat .xyz.com in 2 data files. I'm not so concerned with avoiding repetition that I'm going to avoid retyping it. I'm just going to go ahead and type it twice and know that I got to update it in 2 places.
This is a shortcoming.
Yeah, it's not perfect.
The new Puppet 4 or Hiera 3 or whatever, 6 points.
There's some improvements, yeah. I don't know what they're doing with it. If there was stuff that weren't already in the repo and I knew about it, then I couldn't say anything. But I avoid feeling bad about that by not paying attention to it. So. Okay, so I want to get my data back out. I got 4 ways to do that. 4 ways plus an asterisk. These are the functions that I can call the parser functions. There's the Hiera function, which is the most common behavior. I have another way of getting the same behavior that I use instead practically all the time. I've got a Hiera hash, which is going to merge things together from multiple levels into a hash. I've got Hiera array, which is going to do the same thing but give me an array back. And Hiera include, which does the same thing as Hiera array, but then assumes that they're class names and includes them. Maybe it's what you want, maybe not. The Hiera function, like I said, works in what we consider the kind of the normal way. It just starts at the top and looks in each matching slot, and if it finds the value, then that's the end of the road, and it returns it, and that's the one that wins. So I only get the topmost value. There are other ways of getting data out, though. If I like this behavior, one of the things that comes up is I say, I want to put all my class parameters in Hiera, and why don't I just name them like fully scoped variables? So here's what I would have to do if I didn't have that. I write a firewall class. I want to tell whether or not the firewall should be enabled, so I put a hierarchy in there. I want to default to having it enabled, so I've got my second argument here. I don't actually use this. I prefer for this to fail and not give me a catalog, but if I wanted to fail safe and turn the firewall, I could do it like this. So I call the Hiera function, look up the value, enable firewall, and then test whether it's true or not, and then declare the service appropriately. There's a bug here. I could write this code in a way that's more practical, but then it wouldn't fit on the screen, maybe. So what I want to do here is I want to use enable to set the value of ensure, and In this case, I've just got no resource if it's turned off, which is probably not what I want. How do I support this? I've got to have some data. So in common.yaml or somewhere else in my Hier data, I've got a value for, that should be enable_firewall. I copied that from the better revision, which is here's how I do that using automatic data bindings. So this looks a lot like a class parameter, right? It's some variable that I use to control the behavior of the class. If I've been using Puppet for more than a couple of months, I'm going to say, oh, it should be a class parameter, so I'm going to create a class parameter called enable. And now this makes sense because I can have a variable here called firewall : enable. And in Puppet 3 and 4 and so on, it's going to just automatically look up any class parameters that are there. And now it's going to name them right. It's going to run Hier here automatically to find it. And now I get the same thing that I have with this class with a regular parameter, which is that if I don't give a value, if I don't get anything back from Hier, that is, then I don't get a catalog. Required parameter, it says, sorry. So to get the normal behavior, this is how I normally do it. It tends to be the way that we recommend doing it if you're going to use Hier. Although there are some people who argue that we should use the Hier function explicitly because if I look at this code, it's totally clear where it comes from.
But isn't that also preventing it from being used by another?
Yeah, what is it?
Oh, so if I do it like this, does that prevent some other module from getting it?
No.
Well,
No.
It's just providing the default.
No, if the Hier is not available, it prevents you from doing anything at that point.
Yeah, if Hier is down, then I get no catalog. But I like that because I'm going to assume that if Hier is down, there's something fundamentally broken about my installation, and I don't want to proceed. So your assumption might be different, in which case you should do something else.
Also, the firewall : enable, instead of that, I should be able to say enable, : enable true. So
yeah, I could write this class better. But the question was, like, how many lines am I going to be able to fit on the screen? And it depends on what the aspect ratio is. So that is really what was going through my head, and I decided not to refactor it. I apologize. I didn't promise to talk about Puppet code. So let's say, like you were asking, what if I want to keep looking after I find stuff? I can do that too. So let's imagine that I've got some values that may or may not be spread out through multiple matching levels, and I want to merge them together. I can do that, and that's what the Hierarchical and Hierarchy functions do. Is there a way to get this behavior with automatic data bindings? No, unfortunately there's not. There are some ways to simulate it by using class parameter defaults, but if I want this behavior, I have to ask for it explicitly by calling one of the functions. So I've got values that are in some unknown number of these, and it turns out that the two that I want are in non-production and in Portland. And I don't want to repeat the same stuff there or try to override things. So what I want to do is put the information that's relevant to each level in the right spot and then merge it together. I can do that because the Hierarchical and Hierarchy functions don't stop looking after they find something. So it looks here, doesn't find anything, looks here, adds that to the hash that it's going to return, looks here, finds something else, and adds that to the hash it's going to return, and it goes down to common at the bottom. So.
But it does it in such a way that it doesn't override. You're already in the hash.
The merge behavior is configurable. There are 4 options, 2 of which are reasonable, and 1 of which is only there because the underlying library supports it. So, which, like, I think our documentation says just don't use this. I forget which one it is. My advice is just stick with the default.
Deep is the one you don't use. It's deeper.
Deeper. You're right. The deeper one wins. I wouldn't want that. Yeah. Anyway, so I've got my values here in non-production.yaml. I've got my firewall rules for JMX. I don't want that on production machines because someone's going to connect to it and steal everyone's credit cards. I've got a different port that I use in my Portland data center for my Union monitoring, so I'm putting on 5959. Question is, when I have a non-production box in Portland, how do I get this stuff without having to repeat everything? Hierarchical might be the answer. So if I call the Hierarchical function and ask for firewall rules, here's what I get back. Is I get a hash that contains all the stuff from all the levels there. And if I wanted to use this, I'd have to either do something like this, which is write a bunch of resources by hand. Here's the part of the infomercial, I'm just dropping the eggs. Like, why can't I hold all these eggs? Like, I've write all these firewall rules by hand, repeat the same thing over and over again. I could have to write lots of resources, or I could use the create resources function. And don't worry, for those of you who know where create resources ends up, I have a warning. But this, I think, is a reasonable example. Is I've got firewall rules for different parts of my infrastructure, and I want to merge them together. So I write a class that's called firewall. I've got my parameter here that says whether to turn it on or off. I just cut that section out this time. And the important bit is down here where I want to figure out what resources to declare. So I set up some defaults. Every one of my firewall rules is going to have ensure present. And then I take this hash that I got back from Hiera hash that has all my firewall rules in it, and I pass this to a function called create resources that takes the titles and the attributes and just turns them into resources in the catalog. Very convenient thing. On my team, we refer to this as the PSE's Swiss Army knife because it's almost unheard of that a Puppet consulting gig goes by without having to use create resources at least once or twice. However, don't then take this tool that I've given you and use it for everything. It's not very much work to create your own DSL, your own domain-specific language that consists only of Hiera data. And you say, oh, what if I made a class that also gets the type from Hiera? And oh, I could add some conditionals. Like, it's not that difficult to implement your own DSL in Hiera. No one is ever going to have any idea what's going on except you. So,
and you will 3 months late.
Yeah, especially at 3 a.m., right? So this is kind of an example of where it makes sense to do that because I have something where my data really is spread out across different nodes and I want to bring together rules from different places. That's fine. No one's going to have a problem with this. But if I have to read like a long paragraph about how the hierarchy meta language works, that's also going to be looking at job listings. The merge behavior. I can change the merge behavior for the Hiera hash function in the Hiera configuration file. My advice to you is just don't change it. I haven't met anyone who had changed it who A, understood fully what was happening, and B, was happy with the result of changing it. That doesn't mean that you're wrong if you do have to change it. There's some valid concerns where I might be able to say reasonably that when I have two values with the same key, which one should win? It might be the higher one, it might be the lower one, it might be that the higher one should override all the values, maybe I should merge them together. You know better than I do about cases like that. However, there's one in the documentation, I forget which one it is because I never change it, but don't change it to that one. The only reason it's there is because the underlying deep merge library supports that. So be thinking about what goes into your hierarchy. This is where you define how the case statements in your mental Puppet manifest with many case statements, it defines how they're nested together. But be ready to revise it, A, because you're not going to get it right on the first try, at least if you're managing stuff that is of any appreciable complexity, and if you ever change the way that it's laid out, you're going to have to revise it at some point. So start off generic. I typically start by putting the value in common.yaml, and then I'll override that when I get more information. Don't be afraid to repeat a little bit. If you have to repeat the same thing in every file, like if it reminds you of deploying a whole bunch of handwritten properties files to 100 servers, you're probably repeating too much. That probably is another reason to have another higher hierarchy level. And don't get too magical. I don't want to see a class that figures out how many times to call create resources by using create resources. Anyway, that is all I have. If you have any other questions, this would be a good time for them.
So here's my thought.
Oh, I was off by 1 minute. I'm getting better at this.
Well done.
So here's my softball for those that aren't using Hiera. So it's a lot of work, but I've got it working fine. I've just got my data in my manifest. Why would I do that?
So if I've already got my data in my manifests, I want to think about two things. One is, what's going to happen when I hire someone new? And when I hire someone new who goes to read through my manifest and finds that 75% of what my Puppet code is about is like this shrine to the political structure of my company, that might be a useful way to learn about internal politics, but it's not going to be a way to get a real jump on how the infrastructure goes together. With Hiera, it tends to be easy to see how stuff fits because I read the hierarchy, and then I can take a look at the data files and I can see what kinds of things go at each level. So if I just look through all the nodes files and look at the names of the keys that are there, I can find out a lot about what is happening on a node-specific basis. If I look to what's in the data centers, I can find out things like, oh, well, they don't have NTP on a per data center basis. They have NTP only centrally because that's only in common.yaml. So for onboarding, I think that, if you never expect to hire anyone new, it doesn't really matter. But people are going to be able to pick this up and learn a lot of stuff rapidly, same way they would with roles and profiles if you use Hiera. The second thing is, when 75% of your code consists of case statements, then it's going to be more difficult to maintain. Because it means that when you change something about the way your infrastructure is organized, you've got to go through every single module where you have that code written and change it in every one of those places. And B, because you're no longer going to be able to make consistent assumptions about how these priorities work. If it's in Hiera, there's one way that it has to work. It's written down in one place that I can predict. But if data centers are more important than tiers for my Java stuff and vice versa for my Python stuff, what's going to happen when I start using Jython?
It's also a pain in the ass to just change code. Have to make code changes just because you're changing data values.
Yeah, I don't like having to ship code changes just to change data values, but I don't know. I mean, if it's the same team, it doesn't matter that much.
I'm presently upgrading a 2.7 version, and before the Hiera, before that, and the mess they created just because of the node name parser that they have in there.
Yeah.
And how I had to adapt it several dozen times for different data centers.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I like about Hiera is that I can't take a host name and then pull 15 different things out of it. And that might sound kind of cruel, but it's when I have to parse a host name like that I start trying to encode too much information into it, and that has always been a source of pain. I kind of miss the days where you just name them after some pattern of words. And if I have custom factor facts, I can do that. I just have a custom facts YAML somewhere in the box that configures that stuff for me.
Odd question. Could I create a module that would then put in custom facts into the machine that the Hiera would then use to later on the second pass?
So if I want to have these facts available only on the second pass, like I'm intentionally trying to set up 2 runs to conversion.
The first pass is the issue.
So are you saying that
I'm wanting to store these in the node cluster? I've got a test environment I'm trying to get around. I'm trying not to make super automated.
Okay, so is it a design goal to defer the availability of these facts for the second run, or if I could get them to you on the first run, would that be even better?
If I could get it on the first run, that'd be even better.
Oh, I'll just use plug and sync. I can do that with external facts now too. So in 2.7 there was no external facts, and plug and sync was a different thing. On 3 and 4. And I'm certain there's plug and sync on 2.7, but let's say we're talking about external facts instead of, yeah. So let's say that I want to use external facts. I put them into the facts.d directory, and on Puppet 3, that means that I've got to get them in place before the first Puppet run. On 4, I can put a facts.d directory inside my module, and then all the facts.d directories get plug-in synced before the first run, so those facts are available immediately.
But I was trying to do it per node.
That's going to happen per environment, and it's going to happen at the time the node requests it. So are we going to be able to calculate what these values are for a node during the first catalog? If so, then I might use a file resource to install external facts, and then I'm second round of convergence there. But you said that was okay, so.
Yeah. I was just wondering if there was a better method.
I'm going to try to get as much in place as I can with plug and sync. In your situation specifically, I'm also going to be wondering, is there a way that I could get vSphere or something to install this file for me? Like if vSphere knows the values, then it can add that file and it's there even before I install Puppet.
I don't have access to the vSphere or the Terraform at that point.
Then second run to convergence sounds like a reasonable goal, and I would look at using the first catalog to install external facts with a file resource.
And you can even use tags or something, stage or something to get those dropped in early.
There's probably another way to get the information, but not knowing what he knows is difficult for me to guess. So.
Can you go back to the class example that you had? Keep going.
Talking about this one?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
So the firewall is the name of the class,
Yeah.
but it's not the name of the hierarchy, not the hierarchy name.
It's the name of the key within the,
No, what I'm saying is, if I were to say node 4, : enable true, production, : enable true, enable false, whatever it is. So,
Okay, so I want
does
to,
it have to be separate files? I mean, that's where I'm confused.
so,
if it's production, it's gonna get that key and its value from the production.
Not if you use
order.
Hiera array. Not if you use Hiera array. You
Okay.
can start mining the data, right?
that's why I'm intentionally doing this not with Hier array, so that I can get just the topmost value.
I think what he's trying to do is, if you run across, accidentally putting in the higher data in the two separate files, it's same information.
See, for example, let me give you an example.
Okay.
Let's say I want to be able to go at the production level and say, no, don't look up database. I'm just thinking of a value, okay? But in the node level, I'm saying, yeah, that's fine, go look up the database. But I want to do Hiera array and say, hunt for this data all the way through the sequence, and if any one of them turns out to be false, I want the end result to be false.
Okay, in that case, I'm just going to use in. So if what I'm going to do is I want to look at every single value from every one, and if any one of them is sufficient to cause me to pick that scenario, then I'll use Hier array to look it up, and then I'll use the in operator to find out whether there's a false anywhere in that array.
Right, I get that, but how do you define the data? You have to use this kind of a prefix of the firewall, or that's what I'm trying to understand.
This is just a string. It's firewall, 2 colons, and enable, and it's this colon space here is the separator between the end of the string and the value. This is a convention only. I could name that key whatever I want, and then I've got to use a Hiera function explicitly to ask for it. If I follow this convention, Puppet is going to look it up for me automatically because I've got a class here called firewall. I've got a parameter called enable, so the fully scoped variable name here is going to be firewall : enable. I just name that following the way that I expect that Puppet variable to be named, and it looks it up for me automatically. But I don't have to call it that. I can call it whatever I want.
It's 3 only feature, right?
It's 3 and later, yeah.
Okay. So if you go back to your previous slide, you have an explicit Hiera lookup, yeah.
Yeah.
So instead of Hiera, can I say Hiera array?
I could say Hiera array there. I'm going to get an array back.
Okay.
And it's going to be an array of hopefully like true, false, true, true, false, whatever, but yeah. And then I'm going to use if false in $ enable array, and it's going to return true if there's any falses there, and in that case, I would have it turned on, right?
Do you know anybody who stores node classification in Hiera data?
Yes. I try to keep people who do that on roles and profiles so it ends up not needing the Hiera array-like behavior of the Hiera include function. But one easy way is if I know what the class should be for a node, I can put that in Hiera and then have it spit it back out. So I set a role fact on a box, call Hiera include, and it finds that. Where that gets complicated is where if I say, okay, I want to put a bunch of logic into my node classification for Hiera, then I have to spread out all my classes in the Hiera data as well. Some people like that.
Yeah,
that's why it's there. But yeah,
I could create resources to create resources based on Hiera data, right?
You could, but I would probably not want to declare classes with create resources based on Hiera data. I would use the include function. I would use the Hiera include function first. And really what I would try to do is I would try to use roles and profiles to keep things organized there. But yeah, there's nothing about that that's impossible. So, are there any other questions? Yes?
So you mentioned a number of things that you would avoid patterns and things. Are there others that you have in mind?
I think everything that has ever dismayed me about Hiera is in here, which I guess that would be another way of naming this presentation, but it's a little bit too Eeyore. I don't know if anyone was kind of, here's everything that I hate. If you learn from this, then you're not going to end up with the unhappiness that those other people have had. I thankfully just kind of skip away at the end of the week, but Sometimes end up going back, right? So.
Sorry, one more question. Can you go back to the hierarchy structure that you have, the folder structure that you have?
Yeah.
Yeah, right there. So let's look at the hierarchy data folder, right? So for example, if a machine is shared across teams, and let's say each one of them has their own Git repository for data.
Yeah.
So now let's say Monday, I come in and I use R10K and I pull the data down, right? So Tuesday he comes in and he does his R10K, but the names there like data centers, nodes, and tiers, right? Let's also assume that everybody's playing happy and they're not overstepping each other with folder names. So then it will become like a big dumping ground of all the folders in that location, correct?
If I had as a design requirement that there had to be two separate repositories that produce Hier data that is considered part of the same Puppet environment, then I'm going to end up necessarily duplicating anything that exists for both teams. I would try to avoid making a politically based division in the Hier data as much as possible, because let's say so we've got Team A and we got Team 1, and Team A needs to manage the same component as Team 1 does, the different values, right? Is that ever going to happen? It is going to happen sometimes, because they both need to change the firewall sometimes. They both need to open up different firewall ports. The middleware team is going to need to manage the JVM and control the JMX firewall, and the application team is going to need to control the application that's installed on it. That's the same box. I've got two different teams with the same Hier data. Who among them decides on the value of Java args? The answer is they both do. So the kind of code that I have to write to work around a situation like that is really ugly. And if you think it's ugly talking to the middleware team, get to know them.
Is common.yaml, is that name fixed? That cannot be changed?
You can call it whatever you want. The way that I've written it here is that because it says just like a string common in my file, it has to be called common.yaml here in the file. So I can call it whatever I want, though.
That's not a problem at all. Each team can lay their own data.
Okay.
Each team prefixes my team, then Nahari underscore or Hier, each team has
right.
done.
And like I said, that means that for any spot where two teams might be trying to control the same component, there's going to be physically two different spots on the file system where that data might exist, and you're going to have to pick one of them being more important.
Not really, because your Hier data, your Hier data can say go and fetch the first file, right? I mean, for example, in this case, data centers is only available to you. I will not have visibility in my Hier.yaml to that value, right?
Okay, let's say that we've got, let's simplify it even further. I've got common.yaml for my team and default.yaml for your team. Which one goes first in the hierarchy?
Each one has a different data store. Why does it matter?
Which one goes first in the hierarchy?
You'll have one hierarchy set up for Puppet.
I've only got two files here. That has to be in one of two orders.
Different data backends, right? You can say your backend is this, my backend
You're
is
still
this.
setting up which backends go first.
Someone has to go first, and whoever is first in the list can stomp on whoever is second. So if you get in my way, then I can rename class parameters, and then it won't catch your variables anymore. And then if that pisses you off, then you can overwrite whatever values you want of mine. There's nothing about separating the teams into separate files that solves any real political problems, and it creates some.
So the file name is not a namespace separator.
The file name is a namespace separator, yeah. But here's the thing, is let's say that I have two different teams that both want to do a common.yaml. Are they ever going to be in the same catalog? If yes, then I've got two different hierarchy levels, one of them's got to be first.
Right.
If they're never going to be in the same catalog, then they can be in separate environments, and that's the place to do it.
You said hierarchy is not environment specific.
The hierarchy is not. Hier data can be environment specific. It's this lookup order that I have to decide on one lookup order for the entire master. Or push everything down into data in modules, and then it's just the Wild West.
Everybody gets their own part of the hierarchy.
That's how they got to 141.
So you have a YAML as one backend, right? Let's say I have one backend called Chris, another backend called Roddy.
Yeah.
So I can go and say colon Chris, here's my folder.
Yeah.
Colon Roddy, here's another folder.
Okay, so I control Roddy. If I have commit access to Roddy, then I can put whatever variables I want in there.
Perfect. But Chris, you don't have control over.
Okay.
So Chris comes in, Chris puts their data, Chris reads their data.
So which backend is first?
Which backend is first? That's fine. Chris is fine. Chris is first. Okay, fine.
Oh, of course. Take the one that I don't control.
Okay. Okay, fine. Roddy is first, okay? But that doesn't mean anything, right? All it means is that, yeah, you go look up at Hier first, you won't find anything, because you're not supposed to find anything because your namespace is Roddy underscore whatever.
Okay, so these are, so I'm going to have, so we're saying is that I have two separate teams and they have a separate variable where the data never overlaps.
No, I said the file names don't overlap. I didn't say the data overlap. The data will overlap. Data will always invariably overlap. But file names don't have to overlap, right? You can always begin yours, prefix yours with Roddy. I can prefix mine with whatever.
I would still try to avoid doing this. The real solution is still going to be to have one repo, and then everyone merges change sets in.
Yeah, but see, we have one puppet master for like 5 feet. What do you do?
So they can fork the repo. You don't have to give them commit access to it. They can have their individual forks, and they put pull requests in.
And then who brings them all together onto my machine?
Well, someone's in charge of that decision now.
Yeah, it's not the same thing as data.
Okay. So you're saying fork it, and each one commits their own?
Yeah, and then when I have a change set, I send a pull request. Who is it that would decide whether to put values in one of the two slots now?
See, what I'm missing here is that the name, the folder is not, it could be unique. The name of the file could be unique.
So here's what you're missing is you want to take what should be one file, and you want to put per file line permissions on there. That's what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is you're trying to take a file where there's values that all relate to the same situation in the hierarchy. You're trying to slice that up politically. So you're trying to say that this territory of the file belongs to my team, and this territory of the file belongs to your team. But Hiera can't let you do that. You can't put permissions on parts of files. So what you've done is you've torn it apart into two files, and in order to make it physically two files, it has to be two separate lines in the hierarchy. So you've added stuff in the hierarchy just to reflect this file territorial squabble you're having. There's nothing about this, though, that actually protects you from the other team, or equally to protect them from you, because whoever is first in the list just does whatever they want.
What you're saying, the whole conglomerates the entire set into one giant file.
But I don't get into merge conflicts with them because I have my own branch for my own environment. So I start prefixing the environment.
The whole folder structure, the naming convention is all mute.
And when there is a situation like this where these teams really don't interact with each other, then there isn't a reason for them to have the same puppet master. If there's literally nothing I share with them.
That's not true. In our case, there's one team which monitors puppet masters, okay? And each team wants to use that infrastructure. They want to deploy using Puppet. They want to come together on a bus. There's a file system. I come in, I put my Hiera data. Monday morning, 10 o'clock. He comes in. Monday at 10:30, he puts his data. And he has his prefix. I have my prefix.
Yep.
We can all live in the same ecosystem very happily. But what you're telling me is, no, Puppet takes everything into one dumping ground, makes it a huge file, and therefore we'll overwrite the data.
That's this. This hierarchy is per puppet master. So if your team has a fundamental incompatibility with someone else's hierarchy, you belong on a different puppet master. There's just no way around it. And if the goal is just because there's a piece of paper that says we have one puppet infrastructure, that piece of paper is causing you a lot of problems.
So the YAML data there is useless. I mean, what's the point? If you know you're going to make a big dumping ground of all the files, what's the point of the data there? I can have 10 of them.
Well, I mean,
saying I'm reading everything together.
In the end, these can be thought of as absolute paths. So the root file system is your dumping ground of everything.
Yes, but I have a separation and namespace separation, so the name of the files are the folder. But what you're saying is it all comes together under Hiera.
The point is that we don't separate data into separate files to keep people out of them. We separate it into separate files to express the conditional logic. So there's no permissions information here. There's nothing about this, like if I'm editing this or that says who I am or what team I'm on. It says what I'm trying. This is like a conditional logic thing. And if I decide that this is in my way, I will just write code that does the same thing.
Okay, so the best way to beat yourself out of this, you defeat the purpose is to say every property will be prefixed by my team name. So that way there's no way collisions will happen.
Give them their own environment, yeah. You have your own Puppet environment. If you're in my way and I'm in your way, we belong in different Puppet environments. And if we have such fundamental incompatibilities that we can't agree on the hierarchy, then separate Puppet masters. But if we have infrastructure that's shared, this is stuff that should be together.
Okay, one other question.
One of the assumptions that you place is that you're keeping naming conventions separately, and everybody knows their space, and no one will that ever happen as to you calling a resource the same name as it is on a bit that pointing to a different place. It could very well happen then that at some point one of your group could write a code that will be touching his endpoint, say firewall, for instance, when you actually intended to touch your firewall. Right. What will stop you from doing that if you don't have that?
Nothing, but what I'm saying is Hiera is not giving me that explicit thing saying that, hey, you're a Hiera, you have a namespace, I will read only your data. I will not read somebody else's data for you.
No, Hiera definitely does not have role-based access controls for individual keys. If I wanted that, and I couldn't do it with files, then if there was no way around it, and I just had to have this for, like, within the same catalog, two teams that aren't allowed to talk to each other, which is what you're describing, then I would put it in a database, and I would use some sort of application in front of that to restrict access to individual keys.
But Hiera can also use that, custom lookup, right? Hiera can do custom lookups, right?
There's no bright future for trying to have Hiera data that controls one node. Think about one node somewhere out there, some node. Are there people who can affect that node who don't talk to each other? If the answer is yes, nothing what we're building here matters at all, and there's going to be problems.
Correct.
Yeah.
If the two separate nodes, they're not touching each other.
The two separate nodes, they aren't touching each other.
Then there's no collision, they're separated at this level.
So it's like saying, okay, the two groups do not ever need to talk to each other, use the same resource, but by the way, you both have to talk and make sure your naming conventions are independent, not conflicting. So you're forcing them, even though there's two separate groups that are not supposed to talk to each other, you're forcing them to talk to each other.
They manage the same node. It's a bad idea for them to never talk to each other.
They don't manage the same node. They manage completely different nodes.
So if they're separate nodes, okay, there's two scenarios here. Are they separate nodes?
Yes.
Then they're separate files, because we have a nodes hierarchy here where I have stuff for this node and stuff for that node.
So that scenario is
Unix permissions, right?
Yes, exactly, yes.
Or, a repository merge process of some kind.
Right.
Yes.
So, not quite the same question you was asking. I'm a new guy, the new company, and it's just what you're kind of saying is that OS people, we want to manage the systems with Puppet, and then developers are like, oh, we want to use Puppet also. And then all of a sudden there's the internal food fight. My initial thinking is simply having a Puppet master that's just for the infrastructure management and having another tool for the developers.
Keep it simple.
And if they're both Puppet, then I've got a node that serves two masters, right?
Well, and that's my first question was, I don't believe that's a possibility, is it?
Can you?
Masterless Puppet might be the only way to do that.
No one has ever got me this close to suggesting masterless. I'm not going to suggest masterless Puppet. I thought you were going to say non-root Puppet, and this is the closest anyone's got me to suggesting non-root Puppet. But can you get the developers by? Can they get what they need just using one non-root user?
That would be. Again, I'm in a new environment. In my old environment, we used to have a /apps, and everything that the developers went with underneath that. I mean, they didn't have access to the firewall rules. They didn't have access to a lot of those type of things.
It's about the political communications, not just the one single user for development.
I mean, the system infrastructure team can always stomp on the developers in this scenario because they have root, right? So if I have root, I can overwrite the root file system. I can overwrite devmem. It's game over.
Yeah. I'm just thinking the way, politically speaking, the reality is out there in the real world.
There's kind of two ways to go here. One is that there's going to be one catalog that describes the node, and their stuff goes into it, and your stuff goes into it. Maybe they have some modules that manage their stuff, and you have some modules that manage your stuff. It all gets installed into the environment, build a catalog with that, and it manages the node. That's kind of the direction I would want to go. that's going to mean that you're probably responsible for merging their pull requests to the Puppet files. When they say, I want a new version of our module, then, you know, you'll, if you don't have that, then they're just going to run execs as root, right? So, I mean, it's not saying they would do that, but there's not, you haven't really taken anything away from them that they're allowed to put every code in they want.
Gatekeeper anyway.
Kind of the other direction is that they're separate catalogs, and the only way to make that sane is that if they don't both have root. So if I have separate catalogs, then I could have one Puppet agent with my, you know, I've got my root agent that's running as root, and it's got its cert in Etsy Puppet SSL, and it gets its catalog, and that manages all the infrastructure stuff. And then I've got the developers, and they've got their own user-level SSL directory. So if I'm not root and I run Puppet, it's going to say, oh, I need a new key, and so it creates a key for them. I'm pretty sure that no longer costs you an extra node in PE billing. I think that they were always sympathetic to that. It's like, oh, we're using multiple non-root accounts on the same box. Can you please not bill us n times? And sure. But anyway, I think that the default behavior is no longer that bills you twice. But certainly, you could have two agents running, one with non-root. What you can do with non-root is limited, though. So you're limited to just a few resource types. Yeah.
The other, working at this environment, I know that on Puppet Labs there's an architect page on, you know, best practices of sites and all that, but in your experience, I mean, this environment's only got like 1,500 nodes, but their servers follow it. And I'm just kind of curious.
One server?
Yeah.
How many resources are in the catalog?
Yeah, I just have like 3 hours with one of their former or current Puppet administrators, so I don't know.
So if this is like the place that I was at on the West Coast a couple of weeks ago, where every node collects 800 exported resources, then there's just no way to make one server fast enough. They have 75 Puppet masters. If we're talking about like a 200 resource catalog and the hardware looks right and it's a recent version of Puppet, then I don't know of anything that could be making it slow off the top of my head.
Puppet DB Hier backend. It was killing us.
And this is Puppet 3.
Yeah.
Well, we had 4 backends, and one of them was Puppet DB, I should say. So it was doing 4 lookups per.
So now that you've got 3 backends, you're happy again?
Now that we have 1 backend, we're super happy. So we have the HTTP backend, which is like.
But were you happy as soon as you got below 4 backends?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to check because I've been saying that for a while. So.
I have one EML question.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say there's a password that I protect by, let's say, day64 encode the password or whatever and put it to get. Now, I do an art and can I pull the data?
Yeah.
Now, let's say, how do you tell the EML backend that, hey, this is an encrypted value? And
the way that I tell EML that a value is encrypted is by writing special magic strings on the line, and the best way to do that is going to be using the EYAML tool. So if I show an encrypted YAML file to the regular YAML backend, it's just going to spit out ciphertext with delimiters at the beginning and the end. Those delimiters are meaningful to EYAML. So if you show the EYAML backend a file that has those special delimiters in it, then it knows it's going to try to decrypt it, and it's going to use the keys that are configured in Hier.YAML to try to do so.
so the way it works is you put the keys in Hier.YAML and put the data in Git, which is already encrypted?
Yeah, it should be encrypted in version control. That's really the whole point of EYAML, so it can be encrypted in version control. And for those of you who haven't heard about Hier.YAML, Hier.YAML is an alternate backend that allows you to write data in YAML format, but to use GPG encryption to encrypt one value at a time. It might not be GPG anymore, but anyway, it's public key encryption. So I've got a private key that I can use to decrypt it, and I've got a public key that I can use to encrypt values into the file. I can just put the public key into the repo, and anyone can encrypt values to it, and then, you know, I just reject their pull request if it's wrong. With the private key, I have to install that anywhere that I want to read the values. The Puppet master is where the value gets read. So really the whole advantage that I get of EYAML is that it's encrypted in version control. It never has to land on a developer laptop in the clear, and then it can go to version control from there, and it gets deployed from version control to the master, still enciphered. And at the point the master compiles the catalog, that's where it begins to be in the clear. So the master compiles the catalog, your value is in the clear in memory in the master. And then the master sends that catalog, that JSON document that it's sending over an SSL link, of course, that JSON document that it's sending over the SSL link, though, has your values in the clear. It's in memory in the clear on the agent. And unless you turn off file diffs, in some cases it might be in the clear in your report or in your logs. So what you're really trying to get with eYAML is that it's encrypted in version control. And you know, if a machine can use that value, then that means that it's got it in memory in the clear at some point. Generally, there's some. Yeah.
They don't want to see the password.
Yeah.
They don't want us to see the password either. So you're saying we encode it using the public key and put it inside source code control.
Is there any downstream flow of code from them to you, though? I seem to recall that, so they don't need eYAML for that. They just don't give you access.
No, but they only have their own data. But the problem is, what is happening is, we are using ERB templating, right? So inside our code, the templates are replaced with these token nodes.
So wait, there's templates, there's ERB templates.
Five templates, sorry. The templates for a class. For a given class, there is a template.
Okay, and I render that in that class, and
inside that, it refers to that particular key.
So
start using Hiera for that key.
That template is rendered by some class by a file resource, and it's got variables that it's got from somewhere. It sounds like they're coming from Hiera.
It's going to be coming from Hiera.
And you want those to live in version control encrypted, I could use eYAML for that. If the goal is just that they don't want you to see it, then from what I recall, all they have to do is just not show it to you.
Right, but the other alternative, but the problem is, on the file system,
so let's think about the other scenario is that you have values that you don't want them to see. They have the ability to run Puppet on the box. They have root, so they can read it.
At that point, you might just want to make sure your storage is encrypted and have separate storage repositories, and you manage your keys, they manage it.
Or use secret server or something like that, right?
Yeah,
so there's
you could use something like, there's several.
And pretty much all these approaches that don't involve special hardware, like a specialized mainboard architecture, pretty much all these solutions, you end up with your secrets in the clear in memory, at least for a bit. So if that's what you're trying to avoid, you're screwed. But for everyone else, there is eYAML, yeah.
That's the reason why software and hardware encryption is there for
Yeah, I didn't say that. I think I said earlier that there's some ways around this, but eYAML solves really one problem, which is that I want to have my stuff in version control encrypted as opposed to in the clear.
Yeah, there's a hardware/software encryption, but the storage encryption mechanism, you can accomplish that.
Essentially, you use a GPT key, public key, encrypted, put it wherever you need to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Then using the private key on the master, which has the Hiera thing,
right?
It will decrypt it, and the transit is through SSH, which is through SSH anyway. It's an in-memory thing. And then finally, on that target node, of course, it gets written. It has to get written in clear. We understand that. So.
Yeah, this is one spot where I like to point out to people that the master is giving them a benefit over masterless. With masterless Puppet, if I wanted to use eYAML, I could do that, but then I've also got the keys to decrypt all the other data. If I have to deploy all the Hiera data to every node, if I'm using eYAML, then there's really no point to it because that node can read everything, all the secrets for all the nodes.
The Hiera data.yaml file that you are showing here will have the key in this file.
Yeah, there will be a section called eYAML, and it will have datadir, and then it will have PKCS private and public key that will say like the specific path to the key file.
No, the key isn't in the file. The key's in another file.
Right, it binds to it. But there's one key for the entire Puppet master.
Yep.
Well, for Hiera.
So I think that our schedule said we would end at 8.
Yeah, so, we can go ahead and wrap up, hang out for, get another, go to food or something like that, hang out for another, 15 minutes or so, then make your way on out. So,
I'm not trying to end it, but I know some people might want to leave, and I want to give you an opportunity to throw us out if you wanted to.
Totally. I appreciate it. Yeah. Get out now! How dare you? Yeah.
Well, I mean,
that was awesome.
I mean, I think that, you know, with 20 people, we really could stay here until 4 or 5 a.m.
Sure.
Chris, what do you think of Jirac, call it?
No, what is it?
It's a higher replacement. Maybe, I may have it wrong. You don't know this? It's from,
I'll have to try it.